You should get a warning. I think, has that notified everybody that it's being recorded? Yeah. So welcome everybody, and as I say, while I and others are speaking, please do continue to introduce yourselves and just converse, ask any questions you may have. I'll try to chair, I will chair a question and answer session towards the end, after we've heard from Chrissi and colleagues from our Toolkit project team. As I say, we are recording the event and we'll write it up on our blog, and obviously it's a joint event between the White Rose Libraries, so other colleagues from those universities may do so as well. That's just about all I'm going to say, really, just to introduce our first speaker, which is Kate Petherbridge. So Kate's the White Rose Libraries Executive Manager, so she's going to tell you a little bit about her role, how it relates to Open and her involvement in this project. So I'll hand straight over to you, Kate, if that's all right.
Great, thank you very much. Let me just do the slide sharing thing. Can everybody see those? Do they look like slides?
Yeah, I can see that.
Marvellous. So thank you ever so much for letting me talk a little bit about White Rose Libraries at the start of the session today. Some people will know, some people may not know, White Rose Libraries is the point of collaboration between the University Libraries of Leeds, Sheffield and York. And we have 3 strands of focus really in our collaboration at the moment. And they're all targeting Open and supporting Open in some way. So we have the innovation strand, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a moment. And we've got repository services, and we've got the White Rose University Press as well. So in terms of how we support Open, our shared repository services provide the green open route or the primary green open route, I suppose, for Leeds, Sheffield and York. They were the root of the White Rose collaboration many years ago, and everything else we do has kind of grown up around that. So Open has been at the kind of basis of everything we do when we come together from the start, really. And our newest service, the newest thing we've developed as a group, is the White Rose University Press. And that is an open access, library-led academic press. It was founded in 2016, if you're not familiar with us. We publish monographs, textbooks, journals, all under Creative Commons licenses. And we have a management board that looks after what we do and how we do it, and we have an academic-led editorial board that focuses on the commissioning process itself and making sure that we produce things of really good quality. But one of the things that we do that's different from perhaps a more traditional commercial publishing model is that we are interested in supporting open access across White Rose more broadly. So even just as the press, we will go and talk to people as part of their local sessions. We'll engage with departments who want to talk about open access in general terms, not just necessarily in terms of wanting to publish with us or seeing us as a potential venue for that stuff. And we'll also have one-to-one conversations with academics who may or may not be currently interested in publishing with the press, but who want to explore and engage with open access publishing, potentially for the first time. And we want to support as much as we can that open scholarship landscape. So as a press, we've got open journals. Our focus is really on open monographs at the moment. As I say, we're open to textbooks as well, but we've not got any publications that are textbooks at the moment. And our focus is arts and humanities. And our most recent publication is a really fabulous book, and that's not because we published it, it's just a really fabulous book from Penny Spikings in York, Hidden Depths. And because it's free to access to everybody, I really recommend you just going and downloading it, because it's a joy. It's not my subject area at all, but I really loved working with Penny on it. And our next volume is going to be something really different for us, a sustainability statement from the oral healthcare sector about how they want to make their sector more environmentally responsible moving forward. And we hope that's going to come out in the next few weeks. But our innovation strand is where we look at what we can do next. What is it that we could do better together? And we have different irons in the fire in that strand at the moment, and we've got a focus on conversations around digital skills and digital scholarship, which is really hard to say, it turns out. But we've also got a real focus on open. One of the first things that the board did was to help support and build on an existing White Rose level open research network, and to equip that team to do more together. So they were already really hot on sharing and on creating that community to support open research across White Rose. But actually, since we formalised it, we've seen them be able to put on a series of really positive events to support open research practice, and it's been incredibly well received. But the other major thing that we've been doing in the innovation strand at the moment is the project that has resulted in the toolkit as one of its outputs. So this project to support and to engage with open educational resources has different strands. There's a strand to aid discovery through our discovery systems within the library. That's a technical piece of work that's ongoing. And there's also a conversation about how we ensure that people have the skills and confidence within the libraries to really support academics in exploring how to use and develop open educational resources and infrastructures that go around that. But the first output of the project is this toolkit, and it's really exciting to see it come to the point of launch. And the fact that we've been able to do it for Open Access Week is also really brilliant. So that's who we are as White Rose Libraries, and our focus and how we've got to this point with the toolkit. The colleagues who've actually been involved in developing the toolkit, the project leads, will talk to it in a moment. But first, it's really great to have the academic perspective as to why open education is so important in theory and in practice. So I think I'm now going to hand over to Chrissi, who will introduce herself properly and who will take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was really interesting to find out a little bit more. I have to admit that I know very little about White Rose, but the publication looks really fascinating. So I'm looking forward to accessing and reading this as well. I'm going to share my presentation. Okay. Can't see the first slide, and the video gets in the way.
Looks okay. Yeah.
Looks okay from your side. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, first of all, to White Rose Libraries, Nick Shepherd and Antonio Martinez Arboleda for this kind invitation. I will focus on the educational value of open education. 1 second, I have a problem here with my screen. Is there a way I can remove the video? 1 second.
It looks okay from our end, Chrissi, is it?
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of flipping round to your second slide, a blue slide.
Okay, so let me start again. Thank you very much, first of all, to White Rose Libraries and Nick Shepherd and Antonio Martinez Arboleda for this kind invitation. I really enjoyed the first part and finding out more about the OER kit in a tiny bit when I finish. But I will focus a little bit on the educational and social value of open education. I work since the 1st of September at the University of Leeds, so I'm very new to the institution, but it has been fascinating so far. So what I would like to do is, this is going to be an appetizer. And I would like to focus on a collaborative project that I was involved in during the pandemic with 4 institutions, where we looked at the different perceptions of quality of learning. And we focused on ethnically diverse students. As you can see here from the screen, 4 institutions were involved, and it was an extensive study focusing on undergraduate provision on 4 specific courses. But we were very much interested in how learning was perceived and the quality of learning by by especially ethnically diverse students. And you may wonder, what has this to do with open education? But you will see the link very soon. So some of the findings here, these are the key findings that stood out. On the left-hand side, what you see are some of the benefits that students acknowledged widely of learning online and learning with diverse peers, but also how more confident students were more able to engage in autonomous learning. On the right-hand side, what you see here is that there were some challenges, and what we noticed characteristically is that students were looking inwards into their programs. They were very much dependent on their tutors and had extreme challenges of working with their peers and felt loneliness. Now, that study, as I said, the previous one was on 4 institutions in the UK. I was also involved in another study with colleagues from 13 different countries, and we looked at learning during the pandemic and teaching. And while we noticed that in these 13 countries, collaboration and sharing was increased together with experimentation, and that is also evident through other research, there were some challenges there which echo what we had found in the UK linked to that QAA project. But what was significant was that despite the experimentation, despite that sharing, the majority of practices that were recorded were very traditional. Now, where does this lead us? Universities today we all talk a lot about a sense of belonging and community, and we often focus on belonging to that university, belonging to a course. However, Graham and Moy here, as you can see, and many other scholars, highlight the importance of community, of higher education communities as part of the world. And this is where I see open education can play a key role. So what is open education? Open education is a movement. It has been around for a while. You can link it back to antiquity even, and Socrates if you like. You can link it to the open education. I've highlighted here some key extracts, if you like, from the Cape Town Open Education Declaration in 2007, where you see that open education talks about and is about that open sharing and coming together of processes and ideas and work together. Now, we are here today to discuss an open education and a resources toolkit that has been developed. So it's also very much about the resources we create and repurpose and reuse, as you can see here in the latest UNESCO publication, but also that opportunity that we are all presented to coming together through these open educational practices, as Catherine Cronin here notes, and come together in that world to co-create. On the right hand side, you see I've tried sort of to group some of these ideas where you see open educational resources. We talk also about open data, but open policy and open government, but also open communities and networks beyond just looking at open educational resources. So it's that opportunity that we are presented with of coming together, co-creating for the good. So how to theorize it? How has open education been theorized? I think it's very much rooted into critical pedagogies, but I've tried to find a way to visualize it, if you like, and have brought 3 things together. So the focus on self, if you like, the focus on others, and what we can achieve together. So open education can be seen as Bildung, as something that helps us self-actualize ourselves. And that is very much linked with principles of lifelong and life-wide learning. You can see all the references, and I'm providing the slides, so you can go back to these scholars as well and read more about it. When we talk about others, it is that contribution that we can make for the sustainable development of our world, but also for social justice that has become an increasingly important way of looking, lens, if you like, of looking at open education. Beyond that, yes, we can grow ourselves, we can help others, and we can help the world, but how we can do that is also together. So the co-creation opportunities that we are presented with when we engage in open practices is enormous and very diverse, but also that boundary crossing. So an institution, not just working and practitioners working together with other colleagues in other institutions and their students, but also the public and other groups of citizens. So in very practical terms, if we want to look at open educational resources, but also practices, I don't see that as two separate things, if you like. Then if we add a community, I think these three are really important and fundamental to what open education is, how it is practiced, and how it is experienced. So on the left-hand side, you see, yes, it is. It creates opportunities for more affordable learning. If you think about open textbooks, I think Kate mentioned that briefly earlier, open publications, etc. But we can diversify our practice as well through these resources that we can have access to, that we can share, that we can modify in our teaching, in our learning, but also in the assessment. At the bottom here, you see it creates these connected experiences within academia, but also further afield. And it creates a sense of excitement and motivation, I think, but also the opportunity to make a real difference to the world. And if we think about assessment and the problems we have with assessment, often these days, if these assessments can be real and authentic, and actually linked, for example, to the SDGs or other wicked problems we experience in our time, I think, and do that good, that can make a real difference how our students, for example, engage in that assessment, how they perform and what they get out of it, but also help them become not just autonomous in their learning, but also active citizens. And as I said also earlier, it's that co-creation and that inclusion of diverse processes, practices that is enabled through that open practice with others in our own institution, but also further afield, and create these opportunities with our students to learn and experiment. Now, this all sounds very, very rosy and very good, and the value of open education is that coming together and that sharing of practices and that individual but also collective growth. But there are also challenges, as you can see on the right-hand side. So it's important, I think, to share and be aware of that as well. So while we want to bring people together, especially during the pandemic, we saw that even more. You know, that sense of inclusion was turned to exclusion, perhaps for some, and the inequalities were magnified. Now there is a tendency that a lot of these resources are in English, are from the Western world or the global North, if you like, and there is a danger there of neocolonialism, and we need to be mindful. I think institutions and practitioners have become more mindful in more recent years of the opportunities to be a bit anti-colonial and bring diverse perspectives and views together, I think. But there is that that practice as well, and like I said, with English dominant and that Western culture. So being aware of these challenges, I think, and problems will help us to diversify our practice and stay on path, I think, for harnessing open education that really can make a difference to all. So far I have looked at open education very briefly, of course, and open education practices within learning and teaching. But what about research? So we hear often that universities are for knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination, but I think one further aspect is knowledge translation. And what I mean by that is to make our research accessible to a wider and broader audience, and perhaps OER and OEP can actually help us to diversify the outputs beyond open access academic publication. Very recently I heard actually a podcast where colleagues were saying, well, if a paper is well written, it will travel further. And while that might be true, there are individuals and parts of our population that will never read an academic journal. So how can we diversify? Yes, Nick.
Sorry to interrupt, Chrissi, but we've still seen the self others together slide. Is that correct, or should it have been moved on?
I have moved on. I can see on which one do you see?
The self others together slide. So.
Oh no, I have moved on. Can you not see these?
No. It's still making sense, and we're following you, I think. But somebody just highlighted, and I was sort of too busy tweeting and listening. So.
I'm really sorry, because I move forward and the slides move with me, so I'm not sure what is happening. Can you not see that I'm changing slides now? No,
literally, all we're stuck on. It must be a GitHub problem. Maybe stop sharing and try sharing again. Sorry, I should have picked you up on that sooner.
Sorry, right.
It wouldn't be a live presentation without something like this, would it? So yeah, we were still on.
But you were still on 7.
Yeah. So maybe if we have a quick look at those.
That's very strange. So can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this I really apologize, and yeah, I had no idea that nobody could see what I was talking about. So in this slide here, I was trying to bring together what I said about open education, and especially linked to learning and teaching, and how we can harness the potential of that to create more affordable experiences, to diversify our practice, to make them more connected within and beyond academia, and also co-create with our students. And on the right hand side, what you see here is what I was talking about, the opportunities for inclusion, but how that is often sort of, or can be, an exclusive experience for some, but also that a colonial or anti-colonial, towards which aspect we are working towards, of being aware that perhaps Western and the global North practices and open educational resources dominate the scene perhaps, but also from a language and cultural perspective. So when I move now, can you see that?
Yeah, that's worked now. So I'm not sure.
That's very strange, because I didn't do anything different. So here it was about institutions, creating that knowledge in institutions, disseminating that knowledge. That's what we are for, if you ask some people, but for me it's also more widely about creating thinking and active citizens, proactive citizens, if you like, into that world, who want to make a difference. So if we want to think about open education resources and open educational practices and how they could potentially contribute to sharing research more widely, I think thinking about the knowledge translation will be important as well, and help us diversify and reach different groups of people and different populations. So not everybody, I was saying, I think earlier, will read an academic journal or an academic publication, even if it is well written, even if the language is not wooden and inaccessible. So diversifying how we share our findings and where we share our findings will be really important, and that's where also open education resources and open educational practices present opportunities. As you can see here, some of these are on the right hand side, and I have added some colleagues there whose work you can follow up. Some very interesting work. For example, I'm just going to highlight by Simone Erringfield, who did a research project, and all her findings were turned into music. And I'll leave it there. At the bottom, you can see picture book, and I'm going to very briefly share with you a specific example. So during the pandemic, I received a GoGN fellowship, and with colleagues from different parts of the world, we explored the creation of an open picture books to communicate, if you like, the values of open education through that collective inquiry, and we involved the wider community as well. So this is the output. On the left-hand side, you can see the institutions, and we had colleagues from the Global North and the Global South. It has been translated into 20 languages. So going back to what I said about language and cultures, etc., as well, and how we bring these diverse people together, you see the whole program team here. So what we did is we used, the story is very short, it's under 200 words if you think, and we worked six months on this. So 6 people for 6 months wrote 154, I think, words in the story. But it was an inquiry, a very deep inquiry, where we used, on the left hand side you can see open education resource artwork exhibits from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam to co-create our visuals, and you can see that on the right hand side. So everything on the left is actually integrated in the picture on the right, and Nick will share that with you, so you can do a match exercise if you like. Another output that we had was Doodle Fun, and that was based on Thanassis Frank open access software that he had published on GitHub, and that was used to further help individuals of any age to engage with the book itself, the story itself, but also take it to into new directions, if you like, to use some of their artwork, to create their own text, etc. So here you see a very specific examples. But open book, like I said, is just one way of creating open educational resources, if you like. It can be used in, and we have now written with Paola Corti about how, for example, open picture books could be used for learning, teaching and assessment in higher education, and that will come out shortly. But there are a range of ways, and much of that work that you see here on the slide is collaborative. All of it's actually collaborative. And we have come together, educators and students, and not just share our findings with scholarship and publications on our work, but we are also co-creating resources that will be useful and are useful for others, including open courses. One way that is helpful in helping, I think, colleagues and students to engage in a more systematic way, if you like, and boost that motivation in using open education resource and open education practice as normalized is an open education policy. I know that, and Laura is here with us from the University of Edinburgh, and other universities have been pioneering this for many years now. And it is, I think, something that institutions and practitioners with students can look at how we can make that happen, so that open education resources, open educational practices are recognized, are encouraged, are nurtured, but also seen as something that's valuable for the individuals, for the good that universities want to do to the world, but also help us all grow as a community. These are the references, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissi. And sorry I didn't spot the slides moving, but that was really interesting. And obviously, it's just left me with the impression that, obviously how vast an area this is, which I knew already. And I think really highlights how, we need resources to help us. Certainly for me as a library practitioner, somebody that's got to grapple with different tools and platforms and all the different options in this area. So that's obviously what I think the toolkit is about. So with that, I'll hand straight over to you, if that's all right, Dave, and you can give us a bit of a tour of the toolkit and how it works.
Hi, Maria, are you taking?
Yeah, you're going to share the slides, Dave, and I'll make a start.
Sorry, Maria. So Dave and Maria, colleagues from York.
It's all right. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the launch event today. I'm Maria Mawson from the University of Sheffield. I'm part of the faculty engagement team. I'm going to start by just perhaps talking very briefly about some of the drivers for the project and the toolkit that we've developed, just building on what Kate talked about earlier on. And then I'll be handing over to David to provide you with some more information about the project itself and to share the toolkit and talk you through that. So if I could have the next slide, please, David. So Chrissy's already referred to the definition of OER that UNESCO have provided. So apologies that it's repeated here, but I think it bears repeating. And I think the key point to emphasize here is that open educational resources are not just freely available to view and read, but they're there to be reused, repurposed, adapted to suit local circumstances. And that is generally done through Creative Commons licensing. And there's lots of information about that in the toolkit that we've developed. If I could have the next slide, please, Dave. So just a few comments about the global context and framework around OER. And again, this amplifies some of the things that Chrissy talked about in her presentation. I'm sure most people are aware of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. Development Goal 4 relates to open education in that it aims to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities as well. And I really like Chrissy's use of the word life-wide, actually. I think that's a brilliant term. The 2019 UNESCO recommendation on OER supports SDG 4 by encouraging the creation and use of inclusive and quality educational materials. And I think anybody who's involved in education in whatever context can play a part in helping to deliver this, working alongside governmental organisations and other stakeholders as well. And I think that OER provide opportunities to create cost-effective, inclusive materials that are not just widely accessible and available, but that are tailored towards local circumstances and local curricula as well. If I can have the next slide, please, Dave. So this is going to be, those of you in the audience that are from academic libraries will be very familiar with this conundrum, which particularly relates to e-textbooks in particular. The challenges of providing access to e-books to support our teaching and learning are not new, but they were exacerbated during the pandemic when libraries were only able to provide digital access and weren't able to provide access to any print copies. And the University of York Library did a great Twitter feed, which is summarised here, just outlining the issues that academic libraries are facing around providing access to commercially published textbooks in particular. We wrote a couple of blog posts about this from Sheffield. We'll share the slides with Nick to go alongside the recording after the session so that you can follow the links. But here in Sheffield, we wrote a couple of pieces about the challenges that we were facing. And some of you will also be familiar with the campaign to investigate the library ebook market, hashtag #ebooksSOS, and there's a link on the slides to that as well. I think what the pandemic did do was prompt renewed interest across academic libraries to OER. And I think a lot of us are working on different initiatives to try and develop awareness of open educational resources and looking at different ways to support the use and creation of OER to complement the use of commercially published materials in teaching and learning. Which brings us round to the project that we've just been, that we've run, and the development of the toolkit that we're introducing today. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Dave to continue the session.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, so the White Rose Library project, which started probably about a year ago now when we started looking at this. We were approached by the White Rose Library Committee, so Kate and the rest of them. But the sort of main driver was to sort of really obviously look at the sort of challenging restrictive publisher practice that we discussed previously with Maria said. But the main outcomes of the project was to sort of really sort of improve our knowledge and expertise of OERs, assess the levels of awareness that exist in our institutions about OERs themselves, and to create a resource which could be useful across all three institutions, but hopefully rolled out on a wider basis, and to improve the sort of discoverability of OER through library search systems. I lost the slide.
We can still see the main driver. Your camera's slipped down a moment there, but you seem to catch it.
Yeah. If I just quickly have a look, I feel like I've lost the slide somewhere.
We can still see the main driver slide.
So the ways that we really tried to determine the different areas that we could kind of develop on was, firstly, we sent out a survey amongst the three universities to sort of see what kind of response we could get around the actual toolkit and OERs. And we had sort of 70 responses to this. So you can see that we had sort of quite a wide range of responses from Sheffield, sort of a good amount from Leeds and a good amount from York, about where people were sort of employed as far as the institution goes. We also asked how familiar people were with open educational resources. And as you can see that there were some people that were familiar with it, but overall, I think the sort of general idea is that people didn't know a lot about them, or at least enough to sort of inform any work that they were doing. And we also asked them how to think about their own teaching and how likely were they consider using or adapting existing OERs. And we did have a good response. So there was a sort of 40% that said they were likely to use it. 18% are very likely, and then sort of a 34% that were sort of undecided, and then some smaller groups. But it kind of also sort of showed you that people are interested in looking at these and interested in sort of assimilating them into their work. And we also asked about how likely were people thinking about considering creating their own OERs. And once again, this was a much larger proportion were undecided around this factor, and that's probably because of the work involved in actually creating those OERs, sort of space that's available to academics or researchers to create this material. And the other side of our sort of research into this area was to sort of conduct a few UX interviews. So we split these into sort of three segments where we sort of approached University of York staff initially for 5 interviews to determine sort of how sort of academics go about creating their reading lists, what sort of things do they incorporate, what do they leave out, how do they pull all this together. We wanted to sort of also gauge how they sort of, what their knowledge on OERs was and what they would look at from a toolkit So we initially started this by getting them to draw out a map of how they go about building up their reading list. And certainly for the first 2 UX interviews that we did, the second lot, which was Sheffield and Leeds academics, we sort of used this approach. Our third round of UX interviews, which we've just finished, was really more around the toolkit, and I'll mention that a bit more in a moment. But following on from these interviews, kind of the main concerns that came out from these interviews was that there was a lot of concern around how to go about publishing OER material, where would we store this material, how do we find the time amongst all the other work that we do to create these materials, or even adapt them or find them. And obviously there is also the idea that what sort of recognition and compensation do we get from creating. The outcomes from the project was, or at least the interviews, was that a lot of academics wanted these, the toolkit, to be quite diverse and inclusive. They wanted it to be sort of accessible, and maybe sort of accessibility, there's 2 sort of sides to this sort of word. It's obviously accessibility for users, but also the accessibility for students to be able to use this work once they've left university. I want to sort of look at in their sort of work setting, further research setting. There's also the availability of material, and whilst they wanted an in-depth toolkit, they also wanted something that was quite quick to navigate through. And lastly, a lot of people weren't aware of an OER policy, and that's probably because not all of us have a sort of strong OER policy or anything currently in place, but that's sort of something that we are working towards. The third round of interviews, like I said, was around the toolkit. So we did this once we created the toolkit, and effectively we just asked the sort of interviewees to sort of talk us through the toolkit, comment on anything that was in there, whether it was the layout of the navigation, any of the information that we actually provide on that toolkit. So I'm going to quickly take you through the toolkit. I'll post the link on the chat, but there's also a QR code that anyone can use if they've sort of got a phone and they want to go that way. And I'll just escape quickly and go onto the toolkit. So this is our toolkit. And what we have on here initially is just our home page. I'll sort of try and keep this brief and just go through it. The home page, as you suspect, is just a brief definition of OERs and a few links to the various pages. So this is one entry point to the page we have. And you can see at the top here, we do have all the contents of the pages listed up there. Once again, we wanted to make this sort of a linear narrative to the way that people access things. So we wanted to move from introducing OERs to finding, to evaluating, to creating. So a kind of a natural progression in the rhythm of what people would do. And they may not necessarily follow that path, they may want to go straight to licensing, but it felt like a natural way of kind of expressing this idea. On the introducing side, we've just done a very kind of brief introduction on how OERs are defined, what kind of benefits you might get from using it, ways to use OERs, the differences between OERs and OAs, and some myth busting around OERs. On the finding page, we've just given some search tips and generally repositories and textbook sites where people can find a lot of the sort of open educational material that's out there. On the evaluating page, we've just sort of spoken a bit about the process of evaluating materials and sort of given a checklist and tool and spoke a little bit about accessibility on there as well. On the creating side, we've sort of given a sort of a bit of a sort of rundown of why you would consider creating your own OER, and then tools for creating OERs and how to make it findable, and then our policy. Once again, on the adapting page, we go through a very similar thing, but just from the adapting side. The licensing page, as you can see, is because of the nature of it, is a lot more in depth. So there's a lot more links there, and there are a few other pages that you can bounce between depending on what you're wanting to do with your work. And the last page is our about page, which just talks a bit about the project and what we're doing next with the project, and some of the sort of reports written around creating the toolkit. So we've, as I said previously, we've done a final set of UX to look at the actual toolkit, and we've had quite a lot of feedback from the interviewees for that, and we've done a lot of work. We've changed quite a lot of stuff on the website already, and there are some things such as case studies and making our own videos and things like that that we want to kind of progress towards as we move on into the future. But that's all I'd like to say today. Obviously, if you'd like to know any more, these are our contact details, and we're happy, we'll share the slides with Nick after the presentation. But please feel free to get in touch with any of us, and we can have a chat and discuss anything we can help you with. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I'm just going to turn my camera back on. Thanks, Dave and Maria. That was great. And I've already had a bit of a look around it, and I think it's, you know, a really useful resource. I don't know if there's any questions from the floor. I didn't spot any in the chat. I'll just give people a moment just to think, or please come on the mic and try to be as informal as we can. Sorry for the few technical glitches we have, but that's part of the fun of these things, isn't it? I didn't know what was happening with your camera at one point, Dave. Did it just sort of decide to slide down?
Yeah, I think it was just doing something funny there. I don't know.
I suppose I'll start with a quick question for Chrissi. I mean, you mentioned, Chrissi, the importance of policy, and obviously, you know, you highlighted UNESCO and the Cape Town Declaration, which was 2007, I think. So that's quite a while ago, and I've been aware, certainly, and worked in various roles in the past in open education. Have we reached some sort of watershed in open education? Have things changed, or is it more of the same? You know, what are we making progress in open education, and if so, how and why? Or, you know, are we still fighting some of the same battles that we were 10 years ago? I mean, things have moved on, I think. I just wondered if you could give us your perspective on that.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I think things are changing. They're changing all the time. I mean, that's life, isn't it? A change happens, but we also can make change happen. So there have been, like I mentioned earlier, pioneers and innovators and pedagogic rebels, if you like, who have been connecting and engaging with open education resources and practices for many years now. And for them, open education is something that they see as normalized in their own practice. Now, if we think about at institutional level or sector level, if you like, I think that depends on the culture, I think, that is within that institution, and who's the strategic leadership team, if you like, at the top, and how they see open education. And if we, if you like, as practitioners have managed to talk to those in strategic positions and engage with them in conversations that can make change happen. There are institutions, many institutions, who are ahead of this and have embraced open education at strategic level, and I'm sure more such institutions will follow. I think there are opportunities for institutions to collaborate on the wider stage. And we know that there are initiatives happening in that area too, but we also need to recognize the organizations such as OE Global, for example, who does do an excellent work in bringing practitioners together, but also other stakeholders and leaders in institutions and other organizations who play that role in creating that wider sense of community and urgency, if you like, but also highlight the opportunities open education brings, I think, for us. So a quick answer to your question is, I think things are changing all the time. And I think in networks and communities, open educators bring others on board, including students, but also the wider public. Now, at strategic level, I think something more can be done. I think in that area, to recognize the contributions, and I think David alluded to that as well, where colleagues saying, I don't have time for this, or how is this recognized, etc. So I think there are needs, I think, for strategic leaders, for colleagues in strategic positions, but also with practitioners and with students to work on recognizing the value that open education brings, open educational practices and resources, and how we can do that together. I mean, I'm not advocating it needs to be something top down, but I think it's working with everybody, with practitioners, with open educators, with open researchers as well, and the wider public, local and global communities, how we can embrace it and how we can work together to make change happen that is more impactful even.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think, yeah, it's a lot of, I suppose it's just, I've known Antonio, I think, for at least 10 years. We were working on Durham in the past, and that was a long time ago, and obviously it died down, didn't it, Antonio? And I get the sense that it's coming back, and I wondered what the sort of drivers for that were. Did you want to say something, Antonio?
Well, I had a question. How can we encourage educators to share more of their resources openly? How can we move to something that at the moment is not mainstream, to a situation in which sharing what you used in your teaching with wider audiences can become mainstream, can become something that we kind of do by default, or at least more often. And I wonder if any of the participants have any ideas, any suggestions.
I wonder if someone from the Toolkit team might like to come in on that. I know that you are academic liaison.
I can't hear you, Nick.
Can anybody else hear me? Yeah, I think it's just you, Antonio. Can you hear me? No? But
I can hear you, Nick.
You can hear. It's just Antonio. It's selective deafness, like my kids. I just wondered if perhaps you or Maria, David, just from your perspective, how can we encourage academics to share more of their teaching material? I mean,
sorry, Nick, I was going to say I'm happy to sort of stick my oar in. Dominic Broadhurst made a really good point in the chat, actually, about this partly being connected with reward and recognition and incentivization within institutions, and perhaps particularly in some institutions, maybe research outputs are perceived to be more highly valued than teaching learning outputs, and I think it is a real challenge. I'm not sure how libraries can support that. Certainly in Sheffield, we've got a small grant scheme at the moment that we're running to try and support academic staff who do want to produce an OER. We're in the early days of that yet. We don't have any evidence yet of what kind of impact and success it's having. But I think maybe academic libraries do have a part to play just advocating for this and making sure that the use and the production of OER is recognised in reward and recognition, promotion, career pathway type schemes within institutions. I think that's a role that librarians can play.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and that's certainly something that we're thinking about in the context of open research as well, and others. That's the problem we've got, I think, not just with open education, but with open research, but open in general. What are the reward mechanisms, and getting away from the sort of journal impact factor and all that side of things as well as part of that. I think it's an interesting sort of follow up there from Gordon. Thanks, Gordon. Tell us where you're from as well, perhaps, if you are you from one of the White Rose libraries or elsewhere. He's just asking, would this be done, introducing an OER policy, would this be done as a standalone document or linked to a wider university-wide IP and rights retention policies? I think that's an important point as well, and again, the rights retention angle is really interesting because that's perhaps more on the research side. But again, historically, universities own the IP for staff very often, and actually making that explicit in the IP roles. And I mean, certainly speaking for myself, it's very challenging to even get a handle on that across the huge bureaucracy of a university. So I don't know if anybody's perhaps more qualified to comment than I am on how an OER policy would relate or should relate or could relate to the wider policies around IP and rights retention. But yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Liverpool, thanks.
Yeah, we can I say something?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, no, we have an OER policy. I think our OER policy here at Leeds was the first in the country, actually. The question to me is to have a space and a set of processes for members of a staff of an institution to be able to share, because you know, there are great repositories out there, like OER Commons, for instance, or Merlot, and the toolkit is really good at pointing at those websites that are very useful. But do we really need something else apart from that? Do we need a space, a community of sharing, like a one-stop shop for each institution, regardless of whether that website or that repository is kind of networked with others and discoverable by other repositories, or do we share in external spaces?
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I think that is a good question. I mean, it did strike me. I'll come to you in a moment, Chrissy, but just, you know, the repository question, and we're thinking about research and reward and recognition, and, you know, this still, to me, obviously we had Jorum in the past, but there's nowhere really that these things can be easily shared from. I mean, you can do it yourself through various platforms, but in terms of institutional recognition, is there perhaps something lacking there? Sorry, Chrissy, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting conversation, I think, and many issues I think we are faced, but also opportunities to work on collectively and resolve some of the issues and create a more fruitful, if you like, culture for open education, open educators, but also community. So the question on the repositories, Antonio asked, should it be an internal one? Should each institution have one? I think we can't stop institution having these internal repositories, and I know that they are important for institutions, but I think it's also finding ways how these can be connected and interconnected, I think, with other institutions at national and international level. I think because then it's when we get the real richness, I think, and cross-fertilization and growth of ideas and diversification, I think, of ideas. So that's really important. There is a national repository at the moment, national teaching repository at the moment, that's has been created by a colleague from Edge Hill University, Dawn Irving Bell. And Dawn and many critical friends and supporters are very active in that area and help colleagues share their resources through that specific repository. So that's one angle. Then the recognition angle that Maria mentioned, I think there is a need, I think, to review and not just perhaps academic promotions, because we have many colleagues in professional services also who are engaging with open education or would like to engage with open education practices and resources to find ways to reward them and help them use their engagement with open education for their personal career progression. I think that's really important, that point that you made there, Maria. Now, specifically for colleagues on scholarship contracts, if you like, on academic scholarship contracts or learning and teaching contracts, there is definitely an opportunity there to do something and build that into the academic career ladder, if you like, to really emphasize on the value and recognize the value that open practices bring at that level as well, so that can be an incentive, as colleagues said already. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. I'm going to have to bring things to a close, merely because I'm supposed to be delivering a workshop. My colleague will be there now on research data management immediately after this, which of course is allied to this discussion as well. You know, we have these sort of conversations, and as Antonio, I think that's a good note to close on, perhaps, Antonio, that we, you know, it's amazing that we're all stay together, educators, librarians and learning designers interested in OER and open in general. I think the beginning of something greater. Can we have some kind of White Rose community of interest open to others for OER? I'm not sure if Kate's still here. Has Kate gone?
No, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, Kate. I don't know if you'd like just to to talk to that before we wrap up?
Yes, I mean, that's one of the things that we'd be really keen to see as one of the outcomes from this project, in that one of the things that the project leads are currently doing is they're putting together their kind of end of work report for us, and they're making some recommendations, and we're going to be taking those forward as the innovation board as to how we can continue to support this. So hopefully either that will be one of the recommendations that comes from their report, or it's something that we can feed in alongside those recommendations that they make as to how we can carry these discussions forwards. We already have networks to support open research discussions and things like that, so open educational resources would be something we'd be keen to pick up as well.
Yeah. So that's a yes, Antonio. We just need to make it happen. So thanks everyone, and I'm always conscious with these things, an hour's never enough, is it? But everybody's busy, and obviously I'm sure everybody's got places to go. So thank you to everybody for coming. We have been recording this. We will share the recording and write it up on certainly the Leeds blog. I'm sure colleagues at York and Sheffield will do the same as well. And yeah, so please, in the name of collaboration, keep in touch, whether on social media, email, etc. And hope to see you all again soon, maybe even in real life at some point. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.